Hello and welcome to Generation 16, the series that showcases the history of Sega's Mega Drive. I'm your host, Greg Seward. By December of 1990, Electronic Arts was still building up its Genesis library. It had a fighting game, a god game, a mini-golf simulator, and, although it might not have been clear at the time, had begun one of the most successful and enduring franchises in video game history when it released John Madden Football. One of the genres it hadn't taken on yet was the shooter. And this was important because, as we've talked about before, the shooter genre was huge in the late 80s and early 90s. Heck, in December of 1990 alone, Japanese publishers pumped out over a half dozen shooters. It made sense for EA to get in on the action. In order to do that, EA looked to a Danish company called Capcom, founded by Martin B. Peterson and Torben B. Larsen, which had already published a couple of shooters for the Commodore Amiga. The first was 1988's Hybris. While this shooter isn't the most impressive looking around, at the time of its release it received critical praise for its solid controls, interesting power-up system, and user-friendly options that allowed players of all skill levels to adjust the game's parameters according to their needs. This, combined with an apparent lack of shooters in the Amiga library at the time, led to a hit game. Capcom's second game, though, was the big story. "1990's Battle Squadron was not a direct sequel to Hybris, but a spiritual successor featuring more impressive graphics, more intense action, and a two-player mode. The game was a critical hit, famously scoring a grade of 109% in Amiga Computing magazine, so it's no surprise that Electronic Arts saw a golden opportunity to get in on the super hot shooter genre with a port to the Mega Drive. Although the developer of the Mega Drive version is usually listed as Innerprise Software, a quick conversation with Torben Larsen himself confirms that it was actually original developer Capcom that did the port through Innerprise Software. Capcom's Hybris was released by a group out of Maryland called Discovery Software. But before Battle Squadron was ready to launch, Discovery went out of business in 1989. It appears that Paul Lombardi had jumped the sinking ship and co-founded Innerprise with Torben B. Larsen in order to publish Capcom's follow-up game. Lombardi had previous experience at places like iMagic and Microprose. Larsen says that some aspects of the original Amiga version of Battle Squadron had to be changed to fit the specs of the Genesis, mostly resulting in small changes to the art and game flow. Music was rearranged by Electronic Arts mainstay and British game music legend Rob Hubbard. The progression in Battle Squadron is unique in that you could spend absolutely forever in the main overworld level if you could survive. The point of the game is to fly into a series of 3 different craters in the surface, which grants you access to the underworld areas and bosses. Fail to fly over the Enter Here text on any of the craters and the overworld will continue, eventually repeating itself and giving you a new chance to enter the 3 areas. The 3 underground levels are all unique looking and ratchet up the challenge quite a bit. They're quite lengthy challenges as well. All 3 just seem to go on and on, often featuring multiple bosses to fight. Once all 3 underground levels have been conquered, players are taken back to the surface to fight the final boss. Battle Squadron is hard, like really, really difficult. It pounds you mercilessly almost from the outset, with enemies and bullets flying at you in a relentless onslaught that gives you little or no time to collect yourself and prepare for the next wave. Enemies pass you, then turn and follow you around the screen. Some of them are even invisible. Your fire is constantly blocked by difficult-to-identify ground targets, while vehicles behind those targets fire at you with impunity. Even the power-up ships are loaded for bear, meaning simply collecting a weapon upgrade can be a nightmare. Battle Squadron doesn't have a difficulty setting per se, but you can limit the number of bullets on screen at one time, as well as the speed at which they travel. It's kind of a bizarre set of options at first, but makes sense when you consider it's just adjusting a couple of variables rather than rewriting or adjusting the entirety of the enemy AI. Strangely enough, setting the bullets to the slowest speed actually makes the game a bit harder, since projectiles just kind of hang around the screen a lot longer, turning into obstacles while the entirety of the enemy armada is bearing down on you. The real game changer from a difficulty perspective is to play the game with a friend. While the experience is still really tough, doubling your firepower helps to even the odds a bit. After playing both the Amiga original and Genesis port, it's plain to see the transfer to the new system did the game no favors. It feels like the hitbox on the player ship is a bit bigger, and a lot of the set pieces in the underground areas actually scroll above the action, blocking out huge chunks of the screen sometimes. The Genesis version is just much more difficult than the Amiga original. Innerprise Software only lasted 3 years, finally shutting down in 1992. In that time, it managed to push 12 titles out the door, including a few more on the Genesis, which we'll see in the near future on Generation 16. Unfortunately, one of those games was not the planned Battle Squadron 2. Capcom is still alive, however, and as of this recording, porting its games to mobile devices, and apparently still working away at a sequel to their critically acclaimed shooter. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please share, like, and subscribe. And consider supporting Generation 16 on Patreon. Join me next time when we take a look at the first truly 3D game on the Genesis. See you then.